I want you to imagine this picture. I'm sitting across from a couple who's going through a very difficult season in their marriage. They're trying to figure out what went wrong. And one of the things they bring up is that they're just not communicating anymore. In fact, it sounds something like this. Maybe one spouse will say, "You never talk to me anymore." And then the other person says, "I talk to you all the time. You just don't listen." And then they go back and forth arguing about the details of the communication breakdown. One of the reasons why Carol and I made such an investment in couples before they got married was to deal with this very challenge, to create communication events and make them part of the normal routine in the relationship. In other words, don't wait until things are going wrong before you look at, well, how are we communicating? What is working and what is not? How do you need to hear what I have to say? And so I want to talk a little bit about what makes communication meaningful in marriage. First of all, I want to talk about the fact that there are typically 4 levels of communication. I think we all know this intuitively, but sometimes it's helpful to have language. So, for example, at level 1 communication, we talk about the facts of a day, let's say. Here's what I did, here's the things that I experienced, and that's kind of level 1. Level 2 is when we move from facts to feelings. So not only did I do these things, but I felt this way as I did them, or I experienced this and it made me feel like that. Then level 3 is when you start talking about the values that are related to your feelings. In other words, the reason I got upset about this is because this means a lot to me. I hate it when people aren't truthful, for example, because you have a high value of truth. And then level 4 is related to dreams, hopes, and visions. It's usually that level 4 where we talk about things that we might say, I don't know that other people know this about me, or I've never shared this before. That's the deepest level of communication. So let's set that aside for a moment and say, okay, great relationships are relationships, and I think you'd agree, that are able to go to all 4 levels easily and regularly. In fact, I've found that most people say that when they are able to do that with a person on a regular basis, it's a hint that this person may be very special because they can go to all 4 levels. They can talk about their facts, their feelings, their values, and their hopes and dreams. And it just feels like they feel connected to this other person because they're able to share on that level. Now, before marriage, all of that stuff happens naturally. You're getting to know each other. You feel excited about what you're discovering. But one of the things that happens post-wedding day is that the rest of the life that we're living tends to interrupt that communication process. It doesn't happen as easily, and it doesn't happen as regularly. And so couples who are working hard at communication create events that force them, quote unquote, to do the things they did naturally before the wedding day. So let me give you a couple of examples. Let's say you haven't even talked about your day. It's like it's been 2 or 3 days since you even connected. What gives you an opportunity to do that? Well, I want to suggest that there is a little formula that we've used in our marriage and that we talk to people about on a regular basis as they're preparing for marriage and even as they're sitting perhaps on a couch in front of us having trouble with communication. We offer this particular formula. Divert daily, withdraw weekly, abandon annually. Divert daily, withdraw weekly, abandon annually. And in those 3 practices, you can cover all 4 levels of communication. Let me give you an example. A daily diversion is a time that you set aside every day. You schedule it. It could be before dinner. This is how it was done in my home growing up. My mom and dad would sit down together with a glass of wine and some nuts, shoo the kids out of the room. As dinner was cooking, they would sit down for about 15 to 20 minutes and just talk about their day. For Carol and I, it happens at night, as just before we go to bed. We just take a few minutes to connect and talk about level 1 kinds of things. How was your day? What did you do today? And then the withdraw weekly is a weekly date night. That's when we go to the second and third level of communication. In fact, it's often related to something we discussed in our daily diversion. Like we'll go on a date night, we'll have some dinner together, or maybe if, in our days when we didn't have a lot of money, we just went on a walk and we would say, hey, the other day you talked about this and you obviously got a little upset about that. And I just want to know a little bit more. Tell me about why that was such a difficult day or why that was such a hard conversation. And we get to those feelings and values level of communication. And we feel like, hey, we're walking this path out together. And then in the annual abandon, what we do and what I've encouraged other couples to do is every year on our anniversary, we take 2 days. One day is just for fun, and then the next day is to do a review of our relationship. So we talk about all the things. How are we doing on communication? How are we doing on finances? How are we doing in our spiritual life? What's going on with sexual intimacy? Are we happy, satisfied? And we talk about highlights and lowlights, and we talk about things that we want to do in the year ahead. And this gives us a chance to go all the way to level 3 and 4, where we say, here's how I'm doing really. And here are some of the things that I want to make sure that we do in the last year or in the next year. And then we also get a chance to kind of review the year and say, here are some things that we want to improve. Now, for some people, when they hear this, they say, oh, that's just too regimented. I just want to do this naturally. And what I discover is most of the time when people use that as their answer to this, it never happens. Life is busy. We get preoccupied with things. And so I'm going to encourage, advise, and challenge you to say, you know what? I don't want to be that person that ends up on the couch arguing about how our communication isn't working. I want to create a process. I want to put things on a calendar to make sure that we go to all 4 levels. I'm going to have my daily diversion, my weekly withdrawal, my annual abandon, and I want to connect on a meaningful way, because we know from statistics that communication breakdown is one of the leading causes of divorce, and we don't want that. And so let me encourage you, do the hard thing. Make the plan, make the schedule. You won't regret it.